All right. This is one portion of the Lutheran Saints Ministry Bible study. Pastor Sue and Pastor Craig are in different places, and I'm not sure how many of these recordings will get collected into your weekly Bible study, but I know Pastor Craig is going to assemble something here. So my part is, as always, to just kind of comment on what I see and how I see it all connect with the church in general. What's going to be missing, obviously, is each other's interaction here. But oh well, we next week is coming, and here we are. So let's just look at the texts for the day. I know that we didn't do that in the past, but maybe somehow we can look at what does these texts actually say. We start with a lectionary piece of Jeremiah this week. Kind of an ominous piece of writing. I happen to like it. It's basically a really clear and good warning to pastors everywhere and at any time that kind of says, "Woe to you who scatter my flock." You need to do better. One day there will arise a king like David and all these kind of stuff, the righteous branch, who will actually gather and collect all those who are lost. That's actually a very neat tie into the gospel for the day, because Jesus is, of course, doing exactly that in the wilderness. We'll get there in a second. We read Psalm 23. If you love Psalm 23, this week is your week. We read from Ephesians 2. The inclusion of the Gentiles really is the point here. And not many of us, even if you're listening to me within LSIM, are of Jewish birth. However, Gentiles, like us, have been included in the church from the very beginning. And here's Paul writing about such a thing. And then we get to the gospel lesson. And here it is. It is from the 6th chapter of Mark. Now you notice that it's not continuous. It has a split in it. All right. Now go to your Bibles and figure out what's missing. I'll wait. Okay, I'm just kidding. There's obviously things missing when we have these commas in there. And in this case, actually something very important is missing. It's the feeding of the 5,000 and the episode of Jesus walking on the water. That's regrettable, but let's just deal with what we have on hand. In my case, what I've done when I looked at this, I left the second part of this, all this, good as it is, and happy and interesting as it might be, I left that out of my commentary for now. For the simple reason that it really is another part of a picture frame, and in between are some important pieces. The feeding of the 5,000 and the walking on water. We will talk about one of them next week anyway, so here we are. But the apostles gathered around Jesus. They told him what they had done, what they had taught. He said to them, "Come away to a deserted place all by yourself and rest a while." For many were coming and going. They had no leisure to even eat. And they went away in the boat to a deserted place by themselves. And many saw them going and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. And as they went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. So, the beginning paragraph I've already kind of gone into here. We need to pick up some other things as we read this text. The apostles returned. Well, where were they? Well, he had sent them away. And I call them apostles in my readings and ruminations here a lot, because he has sent them. An apostle is somebody who was sent out, and he now does exactly that. He called the 12 and he sent them out 2 by 2, and he charged them to do pretty much what he had done himself: drive out the demons, heal those who are sick, lay your hands on them, anoint them with oil, pray over them, And apparently they were also to go out and proclaim that people should repent. So if you look at the Gospel of Mark, that's exactly what Jesus' ministry to this point has been. Well, after this sending out, we get what we read last week, the whole episode of Herod, which, by the way, is just a retelling of a story. The reason that it was told right there is because Herod saw the apostles do what the apostles were doing and said, "Oh no, I haven't silenced the word of the prophet like I thought I had when I killed St. John." And then, in what we read today, the apostles returned. They told Jesus all that they had done and all that they had taught. They make report. And he says to them, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest for a while." All right? Let's talk about the culture that this is spoken into. When you're eating, you're having your meal, whatever meal it may be, and somebody shows up, the custom and the faith that it was spoken into demanded that you extended hospitality right then and there. If you think about it, if while you're sitting down and you're having a sandwich, if being hospitable to the person who's just shown up and approached you is demanded of you, the first thing you will do is give your sandwich to them or start dealing with their needs of food. So yeah, you don't have any chance to eat. It's impossible to eat because you're always busy dealing with your guests. Anyone who's ever been in charge of Thanksgiving meal knows exactly what that means. You're always the one who sits in a chair that's closest to the kitchen, and most of the time you actually spend in the kitchen, not eating. But I digress. Also, it's also a place where everyone knows what your neighbor is, their neighbor is doing. And matter of fact, it's kind of expected that you're about trying to figure out what your neighbor is doing. So being nosy is one of the most normal things in the universe in this particular culture. Privacy and these kind of things are more scruples of our culture and our time. Those folks who run to see what Jesus is up to are doing what's just natural. They kind of know who he is. They didn't just see him. They knew what he was doing. They were interested, and they figured they needed to know. And my writing, which is on the screen with you here, I take these ideas from a gentleman who wrote a lot about the Mid-Eastern mind in Jesus' time. His name's John Pilch, so I quote him a number of times as you listen to me talk. He's a sociologist, by the way, anthropologist as well. Now, if you look at folks who are all fascinated and want to know what Jesus and his disciples are up to, you indeed are going to have a lot of running around going on. And yes, it's going to look like a bunch of people are running wildly through the countryside away from their own houses, which is also kind of odd. And they must have felt, or looked like even, sheep that are just basically lost in the country. What does Jesus do? And this is the same Jesus who said, "Come, it's time to go and withdraw and let's have some rest." What Jesus does is he makes them all sit down and he teaches them many things, says the Bible. And eventually he will feed them, but that's next week's story. Few things that stand out to me and should stand out to all of us. The disciples go sent out by two. They are apostles now. They've transcended. He's sent them. He's do things. They now do things on his behalf. Herod is there. The interlude is there to remind us that this world, in certain quarters, is uneasy when the demons are driven out and when diseases are healed in ways that it doesn't approve of. So whatever they were doing, they were proving that there is a force loose in this world that was seen as a threat. When the apostles return and give report of what they had taught and done, there's this homecoming kind of scene going on. They come, they make report, they give account of what they have done, each one of his own work. It is kind of this homecoming, maybe even a homecoming in an eternal sense, as in our home is in heaven, sort of a memory of things not yet happened. They give report what they've done in His authority by His bidding, and He invites them to have Sabbath, rest. Again, echo of heaven. If you look at Psalm 95 and Hebrews 4, and those of you who were at the Bible study through the fall know that we went through those two places where entering God's rest was featured at least one lesson. But somehow this invitation is made, but it cannot be realized quite yet. Why? Well, because there's still people around, and people are yet there with need. Mark reminds us that heaven on earth is at the mercy or at the need of people. And the Sabbath rest must wait until all sheep are tended for. That may take a while. Only after that has taken place can this rest ever happen, this overall peace, this Shabbat ever actually happen. In this world, compassion demands that rest, that heaven, be postponed so that grace might be done. Now, if you think about it, this is kind of also echoed in Matthew 25. You got the sheep and the goats. Both of them haven't done the same work, but the latter haven't done that work without love for the one who sent them, and it would seem without compassion for those scattered sheep around them. In other words, you have to love both, the Lord and the neighbor, as if the neighbor was the Lord. You cannot do the works that the Lord commands you for your own sake. You got to do it for the world's sake, for the love of the Lord and for the love of the neighbor, as if the neighbor was the Lord Himself. As you are in this world, you're still called to do the work of compassion and grace, always. Also remember that Jesus comes off the mountain of transfiguration instead of just deciding to ascend into heaven right there and then. Why? Because the great work of grace hadn't been accomplished yet. The continued work of grace, the work of the Holy Spirit through the church, this is kind of third article of Small Catechism if you need to read up on it, is also yet to be done. There is still work out there. There is still this incompleteness of the work, of the completeness of the work. Rest will come, weary church, rest will come, just not quite yet. Grace and compassion beg that we are diligent, that we're persistent, and even though the work seems to be never done. There will be things asked, however, that are beyond the church. Jesus dares ask those things. Looking at thousands, He looks at the church around Him, the apostles, the disciples, said, give them something to eat. Now the apostles know that Jesus has just asked them to extend the customary hospitality. Remember the hospitality thing? They were all there. The disciples were all there. Jesus just asking, act on your faith, act on our custom as good Jews, and extend hospitality. They know exactly that He has asked them to do what custom and faith demands. They also know it's impossible. It's beyond their capacity. Some things are beyond us as church to accomplish, and only the Lord can work them. Only the Lord can work atonement. Only the provident hand of the Holy and Blessed Trinity can supply enough to feed a hungry world. All is under the Lord's hand. Law and gospel, life and eternal life, time and eternity. We merely get to act as waiters as this table of the world. We get to gather the surplus and make sure nothing is wasted. Again, this is stuff that comes from next week's lectionary, but it's important here. While there is world, there is work. There's work to be done. While there is work and need, there's also the Lord present. Maybe the greatest lesson that Jesus taught His disciples as they went out on their first journey to become apostles finally is to trust that the God of Abraham does provide. That's the reason He sent them out without any extra supplies. and just 2 by 2. Like us, they had to learn that it was not all up to them. It was and it is up to the Lord. Steve Wright, as a comedian, once made the remarks that says, Smokey the Bear says, only you can stop forest fires. When I was a kid, I used to sneak out of the house with a bucket of water at night to make sure that I did the job. He seemed so serious and angry, I didn't want to make him mad. Now, the only reason that's funny is because, obviously somebody has misunderstood the you. It's true, the work isn't done. It never will be done until the rest, the shalom, comes. It comes soon enough, brothers and sisters. It comes soon enough. There's also a lot of work to be done here on earth. But the you give them something to eat, goes across generations, across people. My friend Vicky Murph had this note on when we were blessing kids to go to the youth assembly, that in the congregation that she used to belong to, always blessed people no matter what the mission was that they were about to embark on, no matter what the work was that they were about to embark on behalf of the church. So as to say, wherever you go, we go with you. You never go alone. We always go with you. At minimum, our prayers are with you. The history, the spirit, everything. The saints through the ages walk with you. There will be enough strength. There will be enough time. Sometimes the time is longer than a lifetime, but the church will get it done. It is up to us, but it really isn't. We work, and we work diligently, but in the end, all is given by God above. You think about giving up sometimes, because it just seems to be that the need never ends. Does it seem that there's just never enough? Well, don't think that. It will. And there is. For Jesus is here as well. So as a question maybe that you can think of here is, has there been a time when you were just about ready to give up as a congregation, as a people, as a committee, as a task force, as a working team, as a person, because it just doesn't seem to end? And does the invitation from Jesus is saying, there is a rest, and you are invited. Yes, you are invited to that rest, even though today you work. Does that maybe make a difference for you? Go meditate on that, and that's my contribution to you. We'll see each other again next week, I hope, and maybe then we'll all be together again, and some edifying discussion between the pastors might attend you. So for now, thank you for your attention, and we'll talk to you again very, very soon.
Welcome to this session of the LSIM pericope study. I want to begin by reading to you the Old Testament lesson from today for this upcoming Sunday, which is from the 23rd chapter of Jeremiah, the 1st through the 6th verses. Woe to the shepherds who are destroying and scattering the sheep of my pasture, declares the Lord. Therefore this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says to the shepherds who tend my people. Because you have scattered my flock and driven them away, and have not bestowed care on them, I will bestow punishment on you for the evil you have done, declares the Lord. I myself will gather the remnant of my flock out of all the countries where I have driven them, and will bring them back to their pasture. There they will be fruitful and increase in number. I will place shepherds over them who will tend them, and they will no longer be afraid or terrified, nor will any be missing, says the Lord. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I'll raise up to David a righteous branch, a king who will reign wisely and do what is just and right in the land. In his days Judah will be saved, and Israel will live in safety. And this is the name by which it will be called, the Lord our righteousness. A little unusual today. I'm going to actually call up here a document I forgot to bring up. Talk a little bit about the Old Testament text. I'm not a Hebrew scholar per se. But there's some very interesting things here, and because the 23rd Psalm is also one of those attendant lessons for today that everybody usually hears and is interested in, I want to pull that, talk a little bit about that as well in the context of the Old Testament lesson. Get this up here where I can see it. There we go. You should have in front of you now the Jeremiah text. And I want to, first of all, talk about the use of the word shepherds. It's a pretty common Old Testament word. The Hebrew is not really that important, but commonly used. But there are three kings in particular that are talked about, actually 4 kings that are talked about here. There is Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, and Jehoiakim. Terrible, terrible kings. King Josiah then was a very powerful king, the last probably great king of Judah. And then his uncle Zedekiah, who was the very last king of Judah and the one who was reigning over Judah when the Babylonians came, destroyed the city, tore down the temple, and carted everyone off into exile. These are the shepherds to which Jeremiah is referring. These messiahs, these anointed ones, who've been called to tend the people of God with grace and compassion and intention and integrity. And of course, they weren't, obviously. In verse 2, the word pakad is used. It means to tend, but it also means to punish. This verb serves to create kind of a play on words, to be caring for and to be called into account, both at the same time. And Hebrew only has about 4,000 or 5,000 words total. Now, compare that to English, where we have close to 750,000 words, and you get an idea that quite often in Hebrew, words that meant one thing were often used to mean another because it just didn't have that many words to go around. Unlike Greek and English, Hebrew is not an idiomatic language. That is, it's not a colorful language in the sense that it uses words to draw pictures for you in your mind. It engages you very much logically. And so when it uses a word, it means the intention of the word. And that leads to verse 5, righteous branch. And the word for righteous in Hebrew is tzedek, or tzadek. It can be pronounced both ways. Sometimes it's translated as steadfast love. We would translate that word most likely in the modern world as love and God's love. And the closest Greek word that we have to that is the word agape or agape, as you've probably heard it. Righteous branch, tzedek. And the last king was named Zedekiah, that is Zedekiah, meaning God's righteous man. And so in verse 6, you have Jeremiah the prophet making a pun. And that's the way in Hebrew sometimes the prophets got their points, by turning words into puns. So Yahweh, our righteousness, is Yahu Yah Tzedek or Zedekiah, and that means is a play on Zedekiah's name, which means Yahweh is my righteousness, or I am the righteous man of Yahweh. And in the simplest of terms, the phrase means that the Lord is the one who determines what is right. The Lord is the one who determines what is wrong. That is, Yahweh is the one. And the sense of what is right can mean doing what is right, doing justice, or establishing justice. So in the Old Testament, this story here talks about the shepherd kings, the messiahs, as being the ones responsible for doing God's will, God's just will in the world. And when he does not do those things, he is punished and the people are punished. They're punished because they don't know what God's will is and they don't receive God's tzadek, his righteous judgment. And he's punished for not executing it properly. And that's what, of course, happens to the entire kingdom. Righteous branch, he says, I'll raise up a righteous branch, which means that while the city is torn down and the temple is burnt to the ground, that's what happens, and the people carted off into exile, God is not done with it. The last king's name is meant both as a curse word, the one who did not do God's righteousness, but also as a promise that God will raise up a righteous branch. A shoot will come out of it. And we see this theme used quite often. In fact, at Christmas time, we'll quite often read from the book of Isaiah that phrase, I will raise up from the stump of Jesse a righteous branch, the Jesse tree that we call it sometimes. So, interesting text. We don't get it very often. I wanted to lift it up. But, of course, today I want to focus on the Greek. And I've got just a few things. First of all, to say that this text from Mark chapter 6 is a continuation of the Galilean ministry that Jesus has been engaged in. And it tells the rest of the story, so to speak, but it leaves out a section between verses 34 and verses 52. And that story is a story to which you are very familiar, is the feeding of the 5,000. So we have a story bracketed in a marked way that tells what Jesus is all about and his ministry, and I want to read that for you also. The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him that what they had done and taught. This is after they returned from the ministry to which he sent them. He said, "Come away to a deserted place by yourselves with me and rest for a while." For many of them were coming and going. They had no time even to eat. So they went away in a boat to a deserted place all by themselves. And many saw them going and knew who they were and hurried there on foot from the towns and got there ahead of them. As Jesus got ashore, he found a great crowd. And he looked at them and had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. Then we have the break in the text. It goes to verse 53. When they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret, and the boat was moored. When they got out of the boat, people at once saw who they were and rushed about the whole region and began to bring the sick to him on mats and on pallets, and wherever they heard that he was, and wherever he went, whether it was villages or cities or farms, they laid the sick in the marketplaces, and they begged him to let him touch the fringe of his cloak, because all who touched it were healed. Now, this story can be about a lot of things, but I think that the language lends us in one direction. And I think I understand why the pericope writers took the story of the feeding of the 5,000 out of it, because if we talked about that story this week, that's all we talk about. It's a pretty big story. It's a story that's found, in fact, it's the only story that's found in all four Gospels, almost intact. In fact, it's told twice in the Gospel of Mark, so we have six sources, count them, sources of this story. That's the most, outside of the resurrection, the story we have the most references for in the Gospel. So it's a very important story. But what's going on before and after is also important, and we don't want it to get lost. So let's take the first section, verses 30 through 33. You see here I have a couple of words I'm lifting up. The first one is ho apostoloi, the apostles. This is a word that's derived from the Hebrew and from the Greek. The Greek apostolo means the ones who are sent. We get the word post office from it. We send letters, the post office. In fact, the word epistle, which we use to describe portions of the New Testament we read every Sunday, is a derivation of this word apostolon. Apostle is one who's been sent, one who has heard Jesus' call, responded, and then has been sent for a specific message. Now, it's derived from a Hebrew word, which means one who's appointed, the authorized agent. When a king, when the Messiah would send his grand vizier to another kingdom to announce his will or to negotiate a treaty, that person was, in the Greek, an apostolon, an ambassador. And so it's a very important word in the New Testament and the Old Testament. He calls them and he says, let's go by ourselves. And it's autoi kat hideon. That's the little phrase there. I'm going to highlight right there. Let's see where where the blue is. By ourselves, privately. It's interesting that Jesus is calling his disciples away from the crowd to go to a private place, a place of devotion, a place perhaps of prayer, a place where they can be away, out far from the madding crowd. Of course, they don't get there. He takes them to an eremon, which is sometimes translated as desert or wilderness. But it actually literally means a lonely place or a quiet place, a place where it's outside of the villages. And there were a lot of villages around the Sea of Galilee, a lot of places where people would gather, and marketplaces and all kinds of folks coming and going. He took them to a place that wasn't regularly traveled. And he took them there for a specific reason, anapastoste, to get some rest. The importance of rest here. Now, the Old Testament talks about the Sabbath day being made holy, the day of rest, the day where even God set aside time to do what? To contemplate what his word had wrought in the world. The word of God creates, and for him to just kind of take the time to soak it in and let creation kind of catch its breath. That's what's going on here, this time to get some rest, to catch its breath. But of course, the people don't allow that. In verse 33, you see Jesus and his apostles have gone by boat, but the folks, they've seen him because the Sea of Galilee is a relatively small place. You can actually see from one side to the other. Those of you who've been there know what I'm talking about. They see where he's heading, and they head out by foot. Pitse. We get the word impediment or podiatrist. That's the word. Ped. It means on foot. They get there on foot, and they're able to arrive quicker. Now, what that means is, for you to be able to go someplace around the Sea of Galilee, which is shaped roughly like a harp, and that's what the word Gennesaret means. It means harp, shaped like a harp. For them to make that curve and go around to where the boats are heading in a straight line means there's something going on the lake. Now, we've been reading about storms in Mark 6. Likely, there's been a wind, and we're going to see later on in this story where the wind kind of blows them up where they don't intend to go. But here they do intend to go. They want to go to a particular place that's lonely to get away from the crowd, but they can't. When they get there, the crowd has arrived ahead of them on foot, which should have taken them longer, but doesn't. So it's almost as if God slows them down. They took the shortcut, but God slows them down. And when Jesus sees that crowd, he has, in the Greek, the word is splagnitsomai. It means he has compassion. And literally it means to have your guts moved. It's a visceral reaction. He sees this crowd because they're like sheep without a shepherd, it says. He understands their need to be led, to be nurtured, to know what God's will is. And so he didaskalon, he teaches them. That's the Greek word, didaskalon. He teaches them. It's in verse 34. And so what they're longing for is a teaching, and Jesus provides them out of his compassion for them. Then we skip. We go into this next section here, verse 33. It says he went to Gennesaret. And we normally think of Gennesaret as the sea. Gennesaret. It was called the sea because Gennesaret means harp. And the sea, if you look from up above, it's shaped like a harp. I'm not sure how they knew that. It wasn't like they had maps of the Sea of Galilee, and they certainly didn't have aerial photographs. But nevertheless, at some point when they traveled around it, they got a sense that the sea was shaped kind of like a harp. And so they called it Gennesaret. That's a Greek word. But it can also mean a village. There was a village called Gennesaret, and there was also a fertile plain south and west of Capernaum, which was the headquarters for Jesus and the apostles, which is also called the plain of Gennesaret. Here's the point. Mark is saying that where they landed is not where they intended to go. They had left from Capernaum, and they were going across the lake to go to a lonely place. Now they're heading back to Capernaum. Wherever it is they've gone, it's not where they intended. So the question you ask is, why did they go someplace where they weren't intended? Well, this next word gives us some clue. Prosornvistasan means they anchored. Now, interesting phrase, because you didn't anchor your boats if you were home. You didn't anchor them. You pulled them up onto the shore. And later on we're going to see where we have kind of a mixed picture here. But here's the thing. They anchored the boats away from the shore. They probably waded or swam to shore. It can also mean to beach the boat, which means to pull it up with the keel down into the sand. And if you've ever been to the Sea of Galilee, it's pebbled. It's not a good place to drag a wooden boat up if you can avoid it, but there are certain places where you can, where the gravel is very small and where you can pull up. But you never pull your boat up by the keel unless you're going to go right back into the water again. So wherever it is they've landed, it's a temporary place. And that is reinforced by what's happening here. Etethesan, they placed. People brought to them people, or sick people, on pallets, they say. The astheneo, right here, the sick, the ones who were weak, the ones who were in need of, and then they parakaleo. And there's a very interesting word, because that's almost the same word that's used by Mark to describe how Jesus addresses the disciples way back in a very similar place when he calls them to discipleship. He kaleo. And now these folks, parakaleo, that means that they kept calling him. They kept calling on Jesus. It's sometimes translated as they begged him. What it means is that they ask and they keep on asking over and over and over again. And this is the Jesus who, on the other side of the lake, has already shown compassion because they were like a sheep without a shepherd. They did not have the ability to be taught and to know which direction to walk or to live their lives. Here, Jesus sees them sick and has compassion in a way that he touches and he heals them. And his healing ministry goes throughout the entire countryside. In Mark, healing and teaching always go hand in hand. Jesus' miracles are never unmoored, so to speak, from Jesus' teachings. Now, this idea about the boat being beached or brought on the shore and landing in an accidental place means that this was what we call a mission of opportunity. Jesus didn't plan to go here, But the minute he did get there, God provided him with all these means by which to show his power, to teach people. He just takes the opportunity, and people from all over come to wherever he is. When they see him going across the lake, they follow by foot. When he lands by accident, wherever it is he lands, near Gennesaret, they come there and they bring people from all over the place. He never misses the opportunity to teach or to heal or to preach. And people understand he has the power, and they ask him over and over and over again. It's not a begging, a whining kind of a begging, but rather a kind of assured, confident asking. So I say, if you have a small child, or you remember what your small children were like at the grocery store when you finally got to the checkout, and they wanted a candy bar. And there were usually three ways they would ask. One is they would ask nicely, and you might give it to them. The other was they would scream at the top of their lungs. And the other ones that they would say, please, 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 and wear you down. And about half the time we'd give them the candy bar when they were asking, please, please. This is what's happening in verse 56. They're begging him, they're asking him over and over again because they know he has the power and they know he has the will. And so this is kind of a recognition. He's the shepherd and they're the sheep. The sheep know where the power and where the facility lies. So that's the text for today. And you will see here, I've got some questions that are listed here. I'm going to list them up, and then you can discuss them as you go. The first one is the first text here is about the Old Testament text, the Jeremiah text. Talk about the shepherds in righteousness. Questions 1 or 2. Pause the computer, and then when you're done, go to this next screen. And here you can see the two opportunities are to talk about what it means to be refreshed and also the ministry of opportunity. So enjoy. Thank you for your time this week. We'll see you next time.